5 Arab nations just made one phone call, and within 24 hours, the United States quietly cancelled a planned military strike on Iran. No press conference, no explanation, just a sudden pause. And the reason behind it? It's bigger than anything coming out of Washington right now. Here's what actually happened. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain, 5 of America's closest partners in the Gulf, delivered a private message to the White House. According to reporting from Axios, the New York Times, and the Financial Times, that message was simple, direct, and unusually firm. And it changed the entire trajectory of this conflict overnight. But here's the part nobody is talking about. The message wasn't really about politics. It was about something far more practical. Something that touches every gas pump, every shipping lane, and every economy on Earth. Stay with me, because the early reveal is coming in under a minute. And once you see it, the rest of this story makes complete sense. Here it is. The Gulf states told Washington that if the US launches a strike on Iran from their territory, Iran will retaliate. Not against America, but against them. Their oil fields, their refineries, their ports, their airports. And they refuse to let the US use their airspace or their air bases to make that happen. That's the real story. 5 nations effectively told the world's largest military, not from our soil. And that single decision has reshaped the entire strategic map of the Middle East in just 48 hours. Now let's break this down piece by piece, because the details matter. The diplomatic push reportedly happened in a 24-hour window. Phone calls from Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Doha all landed at the White House with the same message: give negotiations more time. And the reasoning was very specific. According to 2 sources cited by Axios, 3 Arab leaders told the president directly that they don't want their energy facilities turned into Iranian targets. Think about that for a second. America's closest Gulf partners, the same countries that host US air bases, openly said they would not absorb the cost of a war they didn't choose. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Behind the scenes, US intelligence officials began leaking something else to the New York Times. And this is where the story shifts from diplomacy to military reality. According to officials cited in that report, Iranian forces have shown a level of battlefield adaptability the Pentagon didn't expect. The reporting suggests Iran may have studied US flight patterns closely enough to anticipate where American drones and aircraft operate. The Times specifically notes that officials believe US air tactics had become somewhat predictable. That's not a small line. That's a major admission. And this is the moment everything changed. Because once predictability enters the equation, the entire risk calculation flips. Drones become vulnerable. Manned aircraft become targets. Air superiority, the thing America has relied on for 30 years, suddenly isn't guaranteed. And here's the part most coverage is missing. This isn't just about Iran. It's about what Iran may have learned, and from whom. Reporting suggests Iranian forces may have benefited from coordination with Russian counterparts. Chinese involvement has not been confirmed by US officials, but analysts have raised the possibility given recent diplomatic activity between Tehran and Beijing. Either way, the message landing inside the Pentagon is clear. This is not the Iran of 2003. Now, this changes everything about how Washington has to approach the next move. Because if you can't guarantee air dominance, and you can't use Gulf airspace, and your closest regional partners are publicly hedging, you don't have a clean military option anymore. You have a negotiation problem. And that's exactly what former CIA Director Leon Panetta told the Times of London this week. Panetta's analysis is worth quoting carefully. He said the United States always knew Iran would eventually move to close the Strait of Hormuz, and that Washington should have had a plan ready. He added that as long as that strait stays closed, Iran holds the leverage, not the US. His exact framing was striking. He said, Iran has a gun to our head with the closure of the strait. And right now, according to Panetta, the administration has not found a way to remove that gun. So what does that actually mean for you, watching this right now? It means the global oil market is sitting on a knife's edge. The Strait of Hormuz handles roughly a fifth of all the world's oil flow. When tankers slow down, prices rise. When tankers stop, prices spike. And right now, traffic through that strait has become unreliable. That's why the next data point matters so much. According to recent figures, the United States released about 9.9 million barrels of oil from its strategic petroleum reserve in a single week. That's a flow rate of around 1.44 million barrels per day, one of the highest sustained drawdowns on record. In plain English, Washington is burning through its emergency oil supply at near-record speed just to keep gasoline prices from climbing past a politically dangerous threshold. That's not a sustainable strategy, that's a countdown. And every analyst tracking this knows it. Let's zoom out, because this is where the bigger picture becomes impossible to ignore. For 2 decades, the assumption inside Washington was simple. The Gulf states needed America more than America needed them. US security guarantees in exchange for stable energy flows and political alignment. That assumption is now openly under stress. Saudi Arabia has been deepening ties with China. The UAE has been hedging across multiple powers. Qatar is acting as a mediator, not a follower. And every one of these nations watched what happened in Ukraine, in Gaza, and in Yemen, and drew their own conclusions about how reliable Western security promises actually are. So when they pushed back on the Iran strike, it wasn't an isolated diplomatic moment. It was a signal. The old order doesn't work the way it used to. But here's the real issue. Even if Washington wants a quick, clean exit from this standoff, the conditions on the ground don't allow it. Iran has publicly held to its position. According to its own statements and reporting from regional outlets, Iran wants 1. Full control of the Strait of Hormuz. 2. No discussion of its nuclear material at this stage. 3. Protection of its ballistic missile arsenal. 4. Long-term security guarantees extending to allied groups in the region. 5. Economic reparations. That's not a position designed for a fast deal. That's a position designed for leverage. And leverage is the word that matters here, because Iran clearly believes time is on its side. Every additional week the strait stays disrupted, oil prices stay elevated. Every additional week prices stay elevated, the US burns through more of its strategic reserve. Every additional week the reserve drops, Washington's domestic political pressure increases. Tehran does not need to win militarily, it only needs to outlast. And that's an extremely difficult position for any administration to negotiate against, regardless of who is in the White House. Now, let's bring in something that hasn't been discussed much. What happens to the Gulf states themselves if this drags on? Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 plan depends on stability, foreign investment, and tourism. The UAE has built its entire global brand on being a safe haven for capital. Qatar is hosting major international events. None of these countries can afford a regional war on their soil. That's why their pushback against the US wasn't just diplomatic, it was existential for their economic models. And once you understand that, you understand why they were willing to deliver a message most analysts thought they would never deliver out loud. Now let's talk about the world outside the Middle East, because this story is already rippling far beyond it. Europe is watching oil futures nervously, knowing any sustained price spike could push fragile economies back toward recession. China, the largest single buyer of Iranian oil, has every reason to want the strait open and the conflict cooled. India, heavily dependent on Gulf energy imports and Gulf labor markets, is quietly pushing for de-escalation through diplomatic channels. Even Russia, despite its alignment with Iran, has its own complicated calculation. High oil prices help Moscow, but a full Middle East war does not. In other words, almost every major power on Earth has a stake in this not escalating. And yet, escalation remains one bad day away. So now this changes everything about the next phase. Here's what to actually watch. 3 things will determine the next 30 days. First, the Strait of Hormuz. If shipping traffic resumes, prices stabilize and pressure eases. If it stays disrupted, every other variable gets worse. Second, the negotiation channel. The administration has publicly said it's giving talks a chance. The question is whether those talks have any real substance behind them, or whether they're a holding pattern. Third, the strategic reserve. The US cannot keep draining oil at this rate for many more months without serious consequences. That timeline alone may force a decision one way or the other. These three variables are the entire chessboard right now. And here's something most people are missing. The Gulf states' decision to push back may have just rewritten the rules for every future US military operation in the region. Because once 5 nations have publicly shown they can say no, every future request becomes a negotiation, not an assumption. That's a long-term shift in how American power actually works in the Middle East, and it happened almost overnight. Historians may eventually look at this week as the moment the post-1990 Gulf Security Order quietly ended. Not with a war, but with a phone call. Now let's talk about something practical. What this means for the average person watching this video. If you're in the US or UK, you should expect continued pressure on gasoline prices. Not a sudden shock, but a slow grind upward as the strategic reserve depletes. If you follow markets, energy stocks and shipping insurance rates are the early warning signals. Watch them. If you're following the geopolitics, the next signal won't come from a press conference. It'll come from a tanker movement, a sanctions decision, or a quiet diplomatic visit no one announces in advance. Real geopolitical shifts almost never happen on camera. So here's where this leaves us. A planned military strike was paused, not because of protest, not because of public outcry, but because 5 Gulf nations made it logistically and politically impossible to carry out. Iran is sitting on leverage it didn't have a year ago. The United States is burning through its emergency oil reserve faster than it can replace it. And the global economy is one bad week in the Strait of Hormuz away from a serious shock. This is not a story about war. It's a story about how power actually works in 2026. Quietly, through phone calls, leverage, and oil flows, not through speeches. The most important development of this entire week wasn't a missile or a statement. It was the realization, inside Washington, that the assumptions the US has operated on for 30 years no longer hold automatically. That's the real shift. And that's the story to keep watching. If this breakdown gave you something none of the headlines did, hit the like button. It genuinely helps the channel reach more people who care about understanding the world clearly, not just reacting to it. Subscribe if you want more analysis like this, and drop a comment below telling me which factor you think matters most: the oil reserve, the Gulf shift, or the Iran leverage. I read the top comments and use them in upcoming videos. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.